the quality that has overwhelmed me all these years was Srila Prabhupada's inconceivable humility. Because he had that, that disarmed all of my anarthas and maya to the point that I could sincerely ask him the question. At first I raised my hand and he wouldn't take it. And then I raised my hand. He would wait until somebody else in the room raised their hand. Then he would take their hand. He would ignore my hand. 3 or 4 times like this. And I was rephrasing my question in my mind. Then I asked my question. And I closed my eyes and I said, Sri Bhaktivedanta Swami? And that was the moment right there. Because in that moment, when I said his name is actually the answer to my question before I even asked it. My question was, how is it that this universal presence, which is humanly inconceivable, to me at least at this time, how can it have this form of Radha and Krishna? So Srila Prabhupada, his very name is the answer to that question. He is Bhakti Vedanta. He is the end of knowledge, is Bhakti Yoga and devotion to Krishna. And so Srila Prabhupada, for a moment there, I just became disoriented. I said his name and I couldn't even go on with the question. And Srila Prabhupada very, very patiently waited for me. Everybody waited for me. It was a very intense moment because his glance was upon me and his mercy was upon me. So then he answered me, he said, by his mercy. And then he said something very astounding, for which was one of the main reasons that, it was a mystical thing, but it was one of the reasons that broke through my hippie anarthas or whatever I had, so that I joined. Srila Prabhupada said, you cannot make the sun rise. These are in my own words. It's in the folio much more eloquently. And similarly, you cannot make God appear before you just to answer your doubts. So what had happened was 6 months before, I had been sitting on the edge of a cliff after climbing a mountain all night long. And I was going to meditate on Om, and then when the sun rose, I was going to merge with the sun. I was going to become one with the one at that time. And Srila Prabhupada said, you cannot, and when the sun rose, after all this endeavor, I'd been fasting for days, and I'm sitting out here, I climbed all night long this mountain. When the sun rose, it was a cloudy day, and I couldn't even see the sun. So Srila Prabhupada says, you cannot make the sun rise, and similarly, you cannot make God appear before you just to answer your doubts. And the night before I had come to Krishna consciousness, I had prayed to Krishna, to a deity of Lord Shiva, to please help me to know what was the answer of, for everything. And then here the next day I meet Srila Prabhupada. It was so wonderful how everything happened. And then Srila Prabhupada gave a lecture and so on and so forth. Then he went back to his apartment and we were all ready for bed. And then the word got out, Srila Prabhupada came back. This is like 30 minutes later or so. So we all scrambled together and came into the temple room, and we were sitting there very expectantly, and Srila Prabhupada was very grave. And he said, he began by, he didn't say anything at first. He played a tape of Vandeham with himself on the harmonium. He said, I've just received one telegram from my godbrothers at Keshav Maharaj. The person who gave me sannyas has departed. And he said, then as he was talking, he began remembering his spiritual master. There's a cassette tape of this. And as he was speaking, there was one tear, very, very slowly, came and just kind of like hovered for a little while. It was like his separation from his spiritual master. It was such a beautiful tear, just like a shining diamond. So many of us saw that and have commented on it. And at last it fell. It was so beautiful. So Srila Prabhupada, he asked that one document be sent around the room. And this one girl, Madhavilata, was asked to take it around. So she's taking around this document to sign, to reply to the Gaudiya Math that he's received the news. And then Srila Prabhupada said, the girl, she was hesitating, like there was another guest tonight, and she wasn't going to let us sign. And Srila Prabhupada said, no, no, everyone here, they are all witness. So then I knew that Srila Prabhupada was accepting me in a certain way. He was accepting me as a part of something that was happening there. And it was a very wonderful experience. After being with Srila Prabhupada in his room for 2 hours, and there were so many things that happened, then I went into tears. And I said, okay, I'm leaving ISKCON. I'm leaving this movement. I can't take it anymore. I can't become pure like that. I can't become a pure devotee. And so the Narayana and Jai Gopal, they said, you're right. This is not an ascending process. You can't do it. But Srila Prabhupada is so great that he can make a devotee even out of you. And that one glorification of Srila Prabhupada, thank you Narayana, has kept me all these years. So one night, Srila Prabhupada called for us to come and visit him in his quarters at 26 2nd Avenue. In other words, Srila Prabhupada's apartment, where he's staying, is at 26 2nd Avenue. But the new temple is a block or two down the street at 61 2nd Avenue. So we all knew the history and the privilege of seeing Srila Prabhupada at 26 2nd Avenue, so it was really wonderful. So Rukmini and Saradiya and I, we were on our way, but Saradiya at the last minute decided she didn't want to come. There was some practical thing with her laundry or something like that. So Rukmini and I, the minute that we walk in through the door, Srila Prabhupada said, where is Saradiya? And the second we just come in the door, he says, where is Saradiya? And then we understood that Srila Prabhupada was very concerned for each of his daughters, where they were, how they were being engaged, how they were feeling, because there were some feelings there also for why she had stayed back. Srila Prabhupada said, I had no reason to leave Vrindavan to come here. And we all were wondering why Srila Prabhupada had said that. It was almost as though there was a change, that something was going on, and we had displeased him or something. It was such a heavy thing for him to say. And then he said, and you have no reason to come here to see me, except Krishna. And it was so beautiful, the way that smile came up, and he said that. He said, and then he looked at all of our eyes, and he went right around the room. He said, I want that each of you open a center. And he said, this Krishna consciousness must go all over the world. So later in that darshan, then, Rukmini asked, well, does that mean women too? And Srila Prabhupada said, yes. And then he mentioned the person that I was named after, Jahnava Mata. And he said that she had been a great preacher in Krishna consciousness. Gargamuni's introduced to Srila Prabhupada. We have just begun spiritual sky incense. So then Srila Prabhupada said, so Birbhadra, he's this little 12-year-old servant, like this. Birbhadra, you should work, or maybe it was Girish, it was one of the two boys. He said, you should work for Gargamuni. And Gargamuni, you should pay something to Birbhadra. And so we're all astounded. Here's a little boy that's going to be getting money. And the little boy, he's like beaming, I'm going to have money, like even if it's $5 is more than any brahmachari had at that time, So Srila Prabhupada reiterates it again. He says, so you will work for Gargamuni, and Gargamuni, you will pay something to Birbhadra. So it just deepens it, and then Srila Prabhupada said it again, and he said, and Birbhadra, you give the money to me. And then the look on his face, Veerabhadra's face, we're all laughing. So I wanted to be a part of that kind of atmosphere. Everything's light and joyful and intimate, and I wanted to be part of that. So I asked Srila Prabhupada, Swamiji, when I chant Hare Krishna, can I pray for all living entities? And Srila Prabhupada answered me, You know all living entities? You know all living entities? No, you pray to Krishna and you let Krishna take care of all living entities. Bharadraj and I were called to Srila Prabhupada's room. And Srila Prabhupada, we were going to talk to Srila Prabhupada about painting for the Krishna book. So I came in, and Bharadraj was already speaking to Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada turns to me the minute that I come in and said, so, in the middle of the conversation, so what was the conclusion of Einstein at the end of his life? And this is the most amazing thing, because I'm not a scholar, and I don't know anything. But I knew the answer to that question. And so I said that there is a higher consciousness. That because of the order of the universe, this implies a higher being. So Srila Prabhupada said, yes, and then he turned back and continued speaking to Bharadraj. And this is exactly like what happened to Brahmatirtha, in which Srila Prabhupada asked him the meaning of this verse that he had just quoted in Sanskrit or something like that. And what is the translation or something like that? And Brahmatirtha, from his college days, out of the 700 verses of the Bhagavad-gita, that was the only one that he had memorized. And so he was able to quote it to Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada does this. And then Srila Prabhupada's talking, and he begins telling Krishna book stories. Now, for us, actually, we'd never heard of these stories before. We're getting them on the tapes. But Srila Prabhupada now, he's going to tell us stories that we've never heard before. And he's saying that Lord Krishna, he was such a naughty boy. Oh, he also said that to me. He said, a naughty boy is an intelligent boy. I was naughty when I was a little boy. And so was Lord Krishna, and so was Lord Chaitanya. And so then he's talking about how naughty Lord Krishna is. He says he used to go and he used to pass urine on the clean floor, and then he'd go on it, and Srila Prabhupada went like that. Of course, in the book it says spit, but Srila Prabhupada went like that. And then Srila Prabhupada begins telling the story about the universal form, the universe being contained within the mouth of the universe being contained within the mouth of Lord Krishna when Mother Yashoda opens his mouth. So Srila Prabhupada begins to describe it, and he begins to describe how there were oceans and seas, and there was air and fire and earth and water and the 10 directions, north, south, east and west, mountains, and Srila Prabhupada goes on like this for about 5 minutes. And Bharadraj and I were, as he's speaking, and in this wonderful, charismatic way, we're gradually leaning forward. Unbeknownst to us, as we're involved in this story like this. And then at one point, Srila Prabhupada said to Bharadraj, now you paint that! And it was such a shock. It was a double shock, because we hadn't expected Srila Prabhupada. We were coming in, and we weren't expecting Srila Prabhupada to do something sudden like that. And also, it was a shock of how to paint it. So Bharadraj almost fell over backwards, almost lost his balance. And I also fell completely backwards too, like we were just, physically, we were shocked by what Srila Prabhupada had said. So months later, Bharadraj was up in Montreal and really struggling with how to paint this picture. So then he writes to Srila Prabhupada and said, Srila Prabhupada, in all due honesty, I cannot figure it out, how to put all those things in Krishna's mouth. So then Srila Prabhupada sent back a little sketch, and it shows a stick figure of Mother Yashoda standing up. It shows a little stick figure of baby Krishna, of little child Krishna, sitting down, and it shows a balloon coming out of his mouth. He said, that's how you do it. And then Bharadwaj did this beautiful, beautiful painting that's in the original Krishna book of all these things in Krishna's mouth. And that painting is now hanging in the foyer of the Montreal Temple. This incident takes place in Boston at the airport in 1969. And Bhagavan is there, Kirtanananda is there, Brahmananda is there. Everyone has come from all these different centers. And Brahmananda is instructing us, now everybody, you have to behave in a certain way. Previously, you jump over chairs at the airport, it's not good. We have to have some kind of protocol of how, an etiquette, how we handle ourselves in public. This is PR. So everybody's behaving themselves very nicely. And then after a long wait, we see Srila Prabhupada's bead bag up above the customs, some kind of customs wall. We can see it. Srila Prabhupada's. And when Kirtanananda saw this bead bag going like this, he lost it. With his danda, he goes flying and jumping. And all of us went flying and jumping. I'm sorry, but that's all we could do. And then Srila Prabhupada came out and he was beaming. And we were all just bowing down as he was coming. And then there was just like a whole sea of us bowing down. First there was a path of us bowing down, and then there was a whole sea of us bowing down. And meanwhile, there are all these newspaper reporters, and with their cameras and so on and so forth, and they're looking at all this sea of Americans in 1969 bowing down to this Indian sannyasi. Srila Prabhupada notes it. And he said, so, the spiritual master is to be worshipped as God. Can't hear a pin drop in that part of the airport. But if the spiritual master thinks that he is God, then he is dog. And then he had him. He had him. Parikshit said to Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, should we attend classes? Because what was happening at that time was Bharadwaj was taking the artists over to the Los Angeles County Art Museum, and we were studying the art and making sketches and so on and so forth, and he was giving us sketching classes and so on and so forth. Srila Prabhupada said, yes. And Parikshit said, but I mean, and Srila Prabhupada said, yes, morning and evening classes, and Parikshit interrupted him and said, but I mean, and Srila Prabhupada interrupted him and said, but I mean morning and evening classes. And then at that time he said, by your attending these classes, then you'll please the Lord from within your heart, and you will receive instructions from within as Paramatma. Then there's another incident. It was in L.A. in 1975, and Srila Prabhupada was making a tour of all of the L.A. community. So he comes to the art department, and we had just whitewashed the walls and everything and tried to make this dumpy-looking place look nice for Srila Prabhupada. And he's sitting down, and the room is packed. I think my husband got in there too. It was, really, you were privileged to be able to be in that room because there was so little room. And somehow or another, I was already in there, so I was lucky. So Srila Prabhupada is making no comment. And there's a picture very prominently displayed by Jairam. But Srila Prabhupada makes no comment. So then Rameshwara says, Srila Prabhupada, Jairam did this beautiful painting of Radha and Krishna. He wants, Srila Prabhupada. That meant a lot to me. I was really contemplating that one. I contemplated that one a lot. Srila Prabhupada knew us so well. And it wasn't very long after that that Jairam actually left the movement and started painting for the Scientologists. And the symptoms were already in full swing that he would be leaving us. And Srila Prabhupada just like that. And then Maharaj was saying, Srila Prabhupada, when I go to India with these artists for the Mayapur Festival, I also want your permission to take them on a tour of India. And we will be taking sketches in all the holy places to make our paintings much more authentic. Srila Prabhupada said. And as I'm painting today, this is one of my mantras. Srila Prabhupada said, we are not archaeologists. And then he went further and he was explaining how all of this inspiration that we have comes from Paramatma as we advance in devotional service. We are not archaeologists. In Dallas in 1972, Srila Prabhupada, there's a very wonderful and flavorful story about how Sri Sri Radha Kalachandji came to the Dallas temple. It's very exciting. So the deities arrived the same day as Srila Prabhupada, and Srila Prabhupada had instructed that the deities be installed in 2 days. So the deities were covered with a very sticky substance. So there were pieces of like burlap stuck. And even in the painted areas, like his eyes, etc., there were little pieces of burlap and cloth that were getting stuck to it because they were continuing to be sticky. So the head pujari, Ichamati, she was very concerned because she knew that when we would be dressing the deities in the future, that we would have some difficulty. So we tried every solvent that we could think of. There was nothing that would activate this sticky substance to come off. It was something like dupe. It actually would come up, you know. So Ichamati left me in charge of taking this stuff off at the end when we'd already tried everything. And I'd already brought up the point of paint remover, and we had thought about it a little bit. And finally, she left, and I was still trying different substances. And then I began to use the paint remover, and how it happened, I don't know. I don't know if just in the course of using the paint remover on the large areas, if it came off on the painted area, however it started happening, I don't know. But my great offense was that in the end I decided to just go ahead. It was all right. I could go ahead and take all the paint off of the deities, and I could repaint them in 2 days' time. I had the confidence that I could do this. So I removed all the paint from the deities, and when the head pujari came back, she was in a total state of shock. I said, that's all right, you know. She was in a state of shock. It was irreparable. And I began to understand what I had done, you know, in an unauthorized way. Now, I did not know at this time that these deities were already installed. I thought this was prior to them being installed. I didn't know that they had, in one sense, they had been worshipped and that they were 500-year-old deities. I didn't know any of this history at that time. This does not minimize my offense. But anyway, so then I'm painting all night long in Srila Prabhupada's quarters. I'm painting these deities. And then the next morning, all night long, and then I touched the deity, and the deity was totally wet. It was like I was using all this, what do you call it, Japan dryer, etc., and I was confident. And I could see something is wrong, something is not happening. This is not acting according to plan. The paint is totally wet. So Srila Prabhupada's on his morning walk, and Sasrupa Maharaj, he informs Srila Prabhupada of the situation. And Srila Prabhupada stops, and he says, this is my version of it, the best that I can know. He said, pack my bags immediately. I am leaving this temple. You can do whatever you like with the deities, but just don't consult me. So naturally, I went into a suicidal state, very emotionally crying and devastated by my offense of having acted in an unauthorized way. And so then a meeting was called, and you have the GBC, the head pujari, the temple president, everyone's there. And it's in Srila Prabhupada's room. And Srila Prabhupada says, so who has done this? And everyone says, Jahnava did it. So then Srila Prabhupada turns his glance over to me. And he says, who told you to do this? And at this moment, I was totally choked with emotion. There was no question of speech coming out of my mouth. And at the same time, I remember the Srimad Bhagavatam, where the bull does not blame anyone for his condition. So remembering this section of the Bhagavatam, I could have pointed my finger a few places, but I didn't. And I felt that I should not do this. And then Srila Prabhupada seemed a little, from within, I felt a little that Srila Prabhupada was condoning or approving that I'm not blaming someone else. So then Srila Prabhupada said, why did you do this? And again, I'm so choked with emotion, because I've just been crying for 2 hours in a hysterical state. And so Srila Prabhupada begins to be disgusted with me. And he starts to turn his he starts to turn his glance away from me and his mercy away from me. And I thought, Krishna's kicking and his kissing are the same. I want it. I want whatever Srila Prabhupada has to give me. It's mine. This is my quota. So I choked it off. I said, nonsense, Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada said, why have you done this? Nonsense, Srila Prabhupada. So Srila Prabhupada said, suicidal nonsense. And then he turns, now he's turning away from me. I've gotten my mercy. And he's turning away and he's saying, no. Then he asks me, he says, so what is to be done about it? And now I'm beginning to feel, he's changed his tone of voice a little bit, and he seems pleased. So I felt a little, well, maybe it's not all that bad, a little let off the hook. So I said, well, I just called Bharat Raj in LA and explained the situation to him, that this paint is not drying, and so on and so forth. And he suggested that I use, Srila Prabhupada said, Bharat Raj, I am your spiritual master, and I am sitting right in front of you. Why you do not ask me? And I assure you that the sound reverberations of that practically Nrsinga form of Srila Prabhupada, his servant of Lord Nrsingadev, is going out into the universe, still reverberating to this day. It took me about 2 or 3 years to calm down from that. It was so a wonderful cleansing process. And so then Srila Prabhupada is practically disgusted with me. And he turns his glance away from me and he says, so what is to be done about this? So then Ichimati, in all humility, says the same thing I just did, but with humility. She says, well, Srila Prabhupada, actually, there's this kind of enamel paint, and if we use this enamel paint, it can dry within 6 to 8 hours. Would it be all right with you if we use this kind of paint? And Srila Prabhupada said, do it immediately.